I remember the exact moment my husband told me his brother was planning to get engaged again. It felt like someone had quietly reached into my chest and twisted something that had already been tender for years. I smiled at first, because that's what you are supposed to do when someone shares good news. You smile, you nod, you say all the right things. But inside, something in me dropped. And the worst part was that I hated myself for even feeling that way, because what kind of person feels upset about someone else getting engaged? I kept asking myself that question over and over that night. Was I jealous? Bitter? Petty? Or was I finally admitting something that had been bothering me for years? That every single moment I had tried to build a relationship with my husband's family had somehow been swallowed whole by the chaos of his brother's life. And standing there in our kitchen in our little house in Hertfordshire, barely a month after our own wedding, I could not shake the feeling that somehow it was all about to happen again. To explain why the news hit me as hard as it did, I have to go back to when my husband and I first started seeing each other. We met about 3.5 years ago. At the time, everything felt easy in that rare way people always hope love will feel, but rarely does. He was warm, funny, and solid in a way that made me feel safe almost immediately. We slipped into a rhythm that felt natural from the start. Late-night chats over pints after work, long walks through parks on cold afternoons, slow Sunday mornings that somehow drifted into Sunday afternoons while we sat in cafes with tea going cold between us. And during that first year, his family seemed normal. His older brother was married then to a woman he constantly described as the love of his life. I still remember the first time I heard him say it at a family Sunday roast. He said it with this dramatic certainty, like someone in a period drama making a speech about fate. Everyone laughed, and his wife rolled her eyes in that affectionate, long-suffering way couples do when they have heard the same line 100 times before. At that point, I assumed their marriage was strong. I had no reason not to. Back then, my biggest worry was something small and ordinary. I wanted to get to know my boyfriend's parents better, work out how I fit into their family, and try not to say anything awkward over dinner. I wanted them to like me. I really did. So I made an effort. I asked questions. I listened carefully to their stories. I remembered little details they mentioned and brought them up later. I thought that was how relationships with future in-laws were built. Slowly, patiently, over time, with consistency and genuine interest. Looking back now, I realize how naive that version of me was. About a year into my relationship with my husband, things started to shift. At first, it was subtle. His brother began acting strangely at family gatherings. He was distracted, quieter than usual. Sometimes he would vanish into the garden for long stretches during dinner, leaving half his food untouched on the plate. Then one evening, everything finally spilled out. He told the family his marriage was in serious trouble. Not the ordinary rose couples have and then get over, but deep problems, money problems, debt, arguments that had apparently been building for months. He talked about how unbearable things had become and how he was thinking about divorce. That room felt heavy that night in a way I can still remember with uncomfortable clarity. Everyone stopped eating. His parents looked stunned. My husband kept asking questions, trying to understand what had happened and how things had reached that point. And from that moment on, the emotional center of gravity in the family shifted towards his brother. For months, Every conversation seemed to circle back to him, his debts, his arguments, his emotions, his plans. Sometimes he would ring late at night wanting advice. Sometimes his parents would spend whole weekends helping him sort through his finances. There were long emotional talks, tense family meetings, and that awful feeling that everyone was constantly bracing themselves for the next piece of bad news. And during all of that, my husband and I were quietly planning something important of our own. We had been talking about getting engaged. We had even picked a rough timeline. He had secretly bought a ring. We had planned a trip to the Lake District where he was going to propose. I had booked annual leave for it and spent weeks looking forward to this future we were building together. It should have been one of the happiest times in our relationship. Instead, it felt strangely overshadowed. Every time we talked about the engagement, there was this unspoken hesitation between us. Like celebrating our happiness might somehow seem inappropriate while his brother's marriage was falling to pieces. But eventually we decided to move forward anyway. And the proposal itself was beautiful. It really was. It happened during that trip we had planned, and for those few hours, everything else faded away. It was just the two of us, a quiet stretch of water, the wind moving across the hills, and the moment we had been building towards for years. But when we came home and started sharing the news with his family, things felt complicated again. His parents congratulated us, of course. They hugged me and told us they were happy. But later, my husband told me something that quietly hurt more than I expected. When he had first told them he was planning to propose, they had said they did not feel like they really knew me yet. After 2 years together, 2 years of family meals, holidays, conversations, trying my best to be present, engaged, warm. And hearing that made something inside me sink. I did not get angry. I just felt invisible. At the same time, I understood the context. Their son's marriage was collapsing. Their attention was consumed by that crisis. So I tried to be patient with it. I told myself relationships take time, especially in families that are already carrying so much emotional weight. Then Christmas came, the first big family gathering after our engagement. I remember walking into their house feeling nervous but hopeful. I thought maybe now things would finally start to shift. Maybe now that the divorce situation was calming down, we would finally have room to connect. But that night, his brother dropped another bombshell. He announced he had a new girlfriend, a serious one. And I remember sitting there thinking, hang on, what? Because at that point, his divorce was not even final yet. His wife had only moved out maybe a month earlier. The timeline barely made sense, and I could see the concern ripple around the room immediately. His parents exchanged looks. My husband started asking careful questions. Everyone seemed worried that his brother was throwing himself into something far too quickly. From that moment forward, the spotlight shifted again. Now the focus was not on the divorce. It was on the new girlfriend. Everyone wanted to meet her, understand her, work out whether this relationship was healthy or whether it was another disaster waiting to happen. Family conversations revolved around her, and I remember sitting there at those dinners, quietly thinking to myself, I still feel like a stranger here. I tried to convince myself it did not matter. That is what I kept telling myself during those months after that Christmas dinner. Families go through phases, do they not? Sometimes one person needs more attention. Sometimes life turns messy. It did not mean my relationship with them would never grow. It just meant I had to be patient. At least, that is what I said out loud. Inside, it was harder than I expected, because every time we visited, the pattern repeated itself. His brother's life was always the center of the conversation. How serious was this new relationship? How was the girlfriend coping with the aftermath of the divorce drama? Did she know about the financial problems? Were things moving too fast? I would sit there at the table, listening, smiling politely, occasionally joining in, but most of the time I felt like background noise in someone else's story. The strange thing was that the new girlfriend seemed to fold into the family faster than I ever had, and perhaps that was not intentional. Perhaps it was simply circumstance. But it still stung, because suddenly everyone wanted to get to know her. They asked about her work, her hobbies, her parents, how they met. His mom and dad invited her round often, trying to work out who she was and whether the relationship was stable. I remember one dinner in particular when his mom turned to her and asked a long series of thoughtful questions about her childhood and her career. Meanwhile, I sat there thinking, I have known you for 2 years, and you have never asked me half of these things. The thought embarrassed me the second it crossed my mind. I hated feeling resentful like that, but feelings do not always care about logic. I kept reminding myself that my husband loved me, that our relationship was solid, that the approval of his parents did not define our marriage. And to be fair, my husband noticed some of the imbalance as well. There were nights when we would drive home from family dinners and he would let out a long sigh and say something like, "I'm sorry everything feels so chaotic right now. Once it all settles down, it'll be easier." I believed him, or at least I wanted to. Then time kept moving. The divorce was finally finalized. His brother and the new girlfriend kept seeing each other. Months turned into a year. During that time, my husband and I focused on our own life. We planned our wedding, dealt with work stress, tried to build little pockets of calm and normal life in between the constant updates about his brother's relationship, and eventually we got married. Our wedding was beautiful in a quiet, intimate sort of way. Standing there during the ceremony, looking at my husband, I felt completely certain about the life we were beginning together. For that brief stretch of time, all the other complications dropped away. After the wedding, I remember feeling hopeful. Maybe now things would reset. Maybe now that I was officially part of the family, I would finally get the chance to build the sort of relationship I had been hoping for with his parents. We came back from our honeymoon, settled into married life, and for a few weeks everything felt peaceful. Then one evening, less than a month after our wedding, my husband walked into the sitting room with that slightly hesitant look people get when they are about to share news they know might be complicated. He sat down beside me on the sofa and said, "My brother called today." I remember joking lightly, "What's happened now?" He hesitated for a second. Then he said, "He's planning to propose to his girlfriend in April." And that was the moment the feeling hit me. Not shock, exactly. Not even anger at first. It was more like a heavy wave of frustration that rose inside me before I could stop it. Because suddenly I could see the entire pattern repeating itself all over again in my head. The attention, the conversations, the emotional energy of the whole family shifting once more towards his brother's whirlwind relationship. And before I even realized what I was doing, I heard myself say, "Already?" My husband looked at me carefully, not defensively, just trying to understand. "They've been together for over a year," he said gently. I knew that. Logically, I knew that. But the timeline still felt rushed to me, especially given how quickly that relationship had started after all the divorce chaos. And beneath that, there was something else, something I had been trying not to admit. I felt like my chance to truly connect with his family had been stolen by circumstances I could not control. When we first started seeing each other, the divorce drama swallowed everything. When we got engaged, the family were emotionally exhausted and distracted. Then the new girlfriend arrived, and suddenly the focus shifted to understanding her and helping his brother navigate yet another huge relationship milestone. And now, barely a month after my own wedding, the next big family event was already about him again. I tried to explain this to my husband without sounding bitter. I just feel like... I paused, searching for words that would not make me sound cruel. Like every time there was a chance for things to calm down and for me to actually build a relationship with your parents, something massive happened with your brother. He did not argue with that. He actually nodded slowly. I can see why it feels that way, he said, and that acknowledgement helped a little. But what hurt more than anything was something he told me a few days later. Apparently his parents had recently said something about the new girlfriend. They told my husband they felt like they understood her now about as well as they understood me. I remember staring at him when he said that, because this woman had been around for barely a year and a half. I had been in their lives for nearly 4 years, and yet somehow we were still in the same category of still getting to know. That was when the frustration finally curdled into anger. Not rage, not shouting, just this deep, tired irritation, because it felt as though all the time I had spent trying, truly trying, to become part of that family had quietly evaporated into the background of his brother's chaos. And now the next chapter of his life was about to begin. Another engagement, another wedding, eventually. More tension, more emotional energy, more family conversations revolving around him. And the worst part of all was that I did not even know whether my feelings were fair. Part of me worried I was being selfish. After all, his brother had gone through a divorce. Of course the family focused on him. Of course they wanted to make sure his new relationship was healthy. But another part of me could not ignore the quiet resentment sitting in my chest, because I never got the chance to experience that same sense of excitement with them. I never had the moment where the family were fully present, fully invested in welcoming me. It always felt as though I had arrived in the middle of someone else's crisis, and now that same cycle of crisis was about to begin all over again. So when I say I felt angry about his brother planning to propose, it was not really about the proposal itself. It was about the years of feeling like I was standing in the background of a story that never seemed to make room for me. And honestly, even now, I still do not know whether that makes me a terrible person. I did not say any of this to his family, of course. That is the part that probably makes the whole thing look strange from the outside. Because on the surface, I behaved exactly the way you would expect a supportive sister-in-law to behave. The next time we saw them, I smiled. I asked questions about the proposal plans. I nodded and said things like, "That's lovely," and "April will be gorgeous for it." If anyone had looked at me in that moment, they would have assumed I was perfectly happy for them. But inside, my thoughts were going round and round in circles, because it was not just the proposal itself bothering me anymore. It was what it represented. It was the realization that almost the entire timeline of my relationship with my husband's family had been overshadowed by his brother's life drama, and that realization had been building quietly for years. I remember driving home after that dinner, sitting in the passenger seat while my husband kept his eyes on the road. Streetlights passed across the windscreen in slow intervals, and neither of us said anything for several minutes. Finally, he asked softly, "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" I let out a breath I had not realized I had been holding. "Yeah." He nodded slightly, waiting. "I know I shouldn't be this annoyed," I said. "I really do. It's not as if they're doing anything wrong by being happy for him." "But," he asked gently. But it feels like I never got a chance. He glanced at me briefly. A chance for what? A chance to actually be part of your family. The words sounded dramatic the moment they left my mouth, but I could not take them back. I mean, think about it, I continued. When we started dating, everything became about your brother's marriage falling apart. Then when we got engaged, everyone was still dealing with that. Then the new girlfriend arrived, and suddenly everyone had to work out who she was. And now we've barely been married a month, and suddenly there's another engagement happening. The car went quiet again for a moment. My husband was not dismissive. That is one of the reasons I married him. He listens before he reacts. You feel like your moment kept being interrupted, he said. I nodded. Exactly. He tapped his fingers lightly against the steering wheel, thinking. I don't think my parents meant to make you feel like that, he said eventually. I know, I replied quickly. That's the thing. I don't think anyone meant anything bad. It just happened. And that was what made it so hard to talk about. Because if someone had actually done something cruel or deliberate, it would have been easier to point to the problem. But this was not like that. It was just a series of bad timings. His brother's divorce, the emotional chaos that followed, the sudden appearance of a new relationship, and now another engagement. None of those things were directly about me, but somehow they still shaped my entire experience with his family. When we got home that night, we sat in the sitting room for a while. The house was quiet, in that way only houses late at night can be, when the whole world seems to have slowed down. I just don't want to feel resentful, I admitted. My husband leaned back into the sofa. You're not resentful of him, he said. You're resentful of the situation. I thought about that. Maybe he was right. Because if I was honest, I did not hate his brother. I did not even dislike him. I just did not trust his judgment. This was someone who had spent months dragging the whole family through the emotional wreckage of a failing marriage. Someone who had asked for financial help, emotional support, constant reassurance. And barely a month after his wife moved out, he started seeing someone new. Now, less than a year and a half later, he was planning to propose again. It felt reckless to me, not because people cannot find love again after divorce, but because I had watched firsthand how chaotic the last situation had been, and part of me could not stop thinking about the possibility that history might repeat itself. If that happened, the fallout would hit the whole family again. The tension, the late-night phone calls, the stress, and selfishly, I did not want our lives dragged into another storm like that. There was another part of the situation that I had not even said out loud yet, something that made me feel guilty for even thinking it. The new girlfriend. She seemed perfectly nice, but every time the family talked about her, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. They asked about her interests. They invited her over specifically so they could get to know her. They seemed genuinely curious about her, and I could not stop remembering the moment my husband told me that after 2 years, his parents had said they did not really know me yet. Meanwhile, this new woman, who had entered the picture in the middle of complete chaos, was getting exactly the kind of attention I had quietly hoped for years earlier. It was not logical. It was not fair to compare. But emotions rarely follow fairness. I stared down at the coffee table, tracing a tiny scratch in the wood with my finger. Do you think I'm overreacting? I asked. My husband did not answer straight away, and when he did, his voice was careful. I think that answer stayed with me because he did not say I was wrong, but he also did not say I was right, which honestly might have been the most truthful response possible. Over the next few days, I kept replaying everything in my mind. The timeline, the dinners, the conversations, the moments where I had tried to connect with his parents. And I started asking myself something uncomfortable. Maybe they were not intentionally distant. Maybe the truth was simpler. Maybe they just never had the emotional space to focus on building a relationship with me. Not because they did not care, but because they were constantly dealing with the latest crisis involving their eldest son. And now another major milestone in his life was arriving. Another engagement, another wedding to plan, another emotional center of gravity for the whole family. Meanwhile, my husband and I were quietly settling into married life, almost like the calm corner of the story that no one needed to worry about. I think part of me wanted, just once, to feel like the center of that family's attention. Not in some dramatic way, just enough to feel truly seen. And realizing that moment might never come hurt more than I expected. I'm still trying to make sense of all of this. What would you have done if you were in my position? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more about my journey, make sure you subscribe.